Ouagadougou, January 12, 2024. The atmosphere in the city was unusually heavy that morning. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly through the narrow streets, scorching the dusty alleyways with its relentless heat. The temperature had soared to nearly 45 degrees Celsius, causing the ancient baobab trees lining the main boulevard to droop their massive branches as if seeking respite from the oppressive warmth. Yet despite this scorching heat, a cold dread had settled over the entire capital like an invisible shroud. It was as if some unseen danger lurked in the very air they breathed, making even the most hardened residents feel an inexplicable uneasiness. The marketplaces, usually bustling with animated conversations and the melodic calls of vendors, seemed subdued today. Women selling colorful fabrics spoke in hushed tones. Their eyes frequently darted toward the government buildings in the distance. Children, normally running freely through the streets with infectious laughter, stayed closer to their mothers, sensing the tension that adults tried desperately to hide. According to classified intelligence reports that had reached the presidential palace at dawn, President Ibrahim Traore was facing an imminent assassination attempt. The intelligence chief, Colonel Umar Kabore, had delivered the warning personally to the president's inner circle, his weathered face grave with urgency, and his voice trembling slightly with the weight of the information he carried. "This attack isn't just aimed at your life, Mr. President," he had said, placing a thick manila folder on the mahogany desk. "This is a coordinated strike at the very future of our nation, designed to plunge us into chaos and foreign dependency once again." The report, stamped with the highest security classification, revealed that behind this sinister plot was not merely a handful of disgruntled rebels or opportunistic criminal gangs, but rather an extensive international network of forces that had been working methodically for years to destabilize Burkina Faso. Their objective was crystal clear and chillingly systematic: topple the government leadership through violence, spread chaos throughout the country to justify foreign intervention, and ultimately seize control of the nation's valuable natural resources, particularly the newly discovered lithium deposits in the eastern provinces that had caught the attention of international mining corporations. The intelligence dossier detailed meetings held in luxury hotels in neighboring countries, encrypted communications between foreign operatives, and substantial financial transfers that painted a picture of a well-funded conspiracy. Bank records showed payments to local mercenaries, purchases of sophisticated weapons, and bribes paid to corrupt officials who had been slowly infiltrating key government positions over the past 2 years. However, at the center of this dangerous narrative stood a figure whose name was perhaps unknown to the general public at that moment, but who would soon become a symbol of hope and courage for the entire nation. His name was Lieutenant Amadou Savadogo, and his story was about to intersect with history in ways that would change not just his own destiny, but the fate of his beloved country. Amadou was a 27-year-old military officer who had been serving on the president's elite security detail for the past 3 months, having been personally selected by the president himself after demonstrating exceptional valor during a counter-terrorism operation in the Sahel region. Born and raised in the impoverished but culturally rich neighborhood of Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second-largest city, he had grown up in a small mud brick house where the corrugated iron roof leaked during the rainy season, and electricity was a luxury they could rarely afford. His childhood had been marked by hardship, but also by unwavering love and determination. His father, Musa, had died in a mining accident when he was only 12 years old, leaving behind a widow and 3 children. His mother, Tai, a woman of remarkable strength and dignity, had refused to succumb to despair. Instead, she had taken up the burden of supporting their small family by selling tomatoes, onions, and peppers at the local market, rising before dawn each day to secure the best produce, and working late into the evening to maximize their meager income. While other children his age chased hand-stitched soccer balls through the dusty streets, organized elaborate games of hide-and-seek among the market stalls, or gathered around battery-powered radios to listen to popular music, young Amadou would sit on street corners with a worn notebook, observing the soldiers as they patrolled the area. He studied their disciplined movements, their alert expressions, and the respect they commanded from the community. Making a silent promise to himself that would guide the rest of his life, he whispered, "One day, I too will wear this uniform and protect my country. I will make sure no child grows up without a father to protect them." That day had finally arrived after years of dedicated study, rigorous physical training, and unwavering commitment to his dream. He had excelled in military academy, graduated at the top of his class, and earned rapid promotions through his exceptional performance in field operations. But the test that awaited him on this fateful January morning would be of such intensity and consequence that he had never imagined it in his wildest dreams or most challenging training scenarios. When Amadou entered the presidential palace that morning for the security briefing, his polished boots clicking on the marble floors that reflected the morning sunlight streaming through tall windows, he immediately sensed that something was fundamentally different. The usual casual greetings between officers were replaced by terse nods. The atmosphere in the briefing room was thick with tension, worry lines etched deeply across the faces of the assembled officers, like battle scars from an unseen war. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel Ouedraogo, usually a picture of military composure, appeared particularly troubled today. His hands were shaking more than usual as he shuffled through classified documents, and his eyes kept darting nervously toward the door, as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in days, and there was a barely perceptible tremor in his voice that experienced soldiers recognized as the sound of a man carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. When Ouedraogo finally spoke, clearing his throat twice before beginning, his voice was heavy and rough with concern, each word carefully measured as if they understood their potential to change everything. "Gentlemen, today we must take extraordinary precautions that go beyond our normal security protocols. The President's public appearance is scheduled for 2 p.m. at Place d'Ansom Square, where approximately 5,000 citizens are expected to gather for the announcement of the new infrastructure development program. Security has been tripled rather than merely doubled, with additional units positioned on rooftops, plainclothes officers mixed throughout the crowd, and emergency medical teams standing by. Any suspicious activity, no matter how minor it may seem, must be reported immediately through the designated channels." Amadou nodded silently, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, but a strange uneasiness had taken root in his heart like a seed of foreboding. During his extensive military training at the National Academy, he had been taught by veteran instructors that sometimes the heart and human instincts can detect danger faster than the conscious mind can process logical information. His heartbeat was noticeably faster than usual, a steady drumming in his chest, as if his body was already anticipating the approaching storm and preparing for battle. The briefing continued with detailed discussions of escape routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans, but Amadou found his attention drifting to the large window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, among the thousands of innocent people going about their daily lives, enemies were preparing to strike at the heart of their democracy. After the briefing concluded and the officers began filing out with their respective assignments, Amadou carefully adjusted his uniform, ensuring every detail was perfect, his medals properly aligned, his weapons secure but accessible, his radio functioning correctly. He began the methodical process of preparing for the presidential convoy, reviewing his assigned position and mentally rehearsing various scenarios that might unfold. His designated position was in the heavily armored Land Cruiser immediately following the president's specially modified black Mercedes-Benz vehicle, equipped with bulletproof glass, reinforced steel plating, and advanced communication systems. The morning sky above was filled with light dust clouds, and particles of sand danced in the air like tiny golden spirits, the harmattan wind that frequently sweeps across West Africa during the dry season, carrying with it the whispers of the Sahara Desert. But today, these familiar dust clouds seemed to herald a different kind of story altogether, one written in blood and courage rather than sand and wind. The presidential convoy departed from the palace gates at precisely 1:30 p.m., the heavy metal barriers sliding aside with mechanical precision. Security codes began echoing over the encrypted radio frequencies. Eagle 1 en route. All units maintain designated positions. Perimeter security. Report status. The responses came in quick succession from various checkpoints throughout the city. Checkpoint Alpha, all clear. Rooftop Team Bravo, no unusual activity. Mobile Unit Charlie, traffic patterns normal. Each confirmation added another layer to the complex security web designed to protect the nation's leader. But Amadou knew that even the most elaborate plans could unravel with a single unexpected variable. President Traore sat comfortably in his armored vehicle, occasionally waving through the tinted windows at small groups of citizens who had gathered along the route despite the scorching afternoon heat. His expression showed the quiet confidence of a leader who genuinely believed in the support of his people and the righteousness of his cause. At 42 years old, Traore had already survived 2 previous coup attempts and numerous assassination plots, developing what his security team called an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. The president had spent the morning reviewing his speech, which would announce a massive infrastructure project funded through a partnership with several European nations, new schools, hospitals, and roads that would transform the lives of millions of Burkina citizens. It was exactly the kind of progress that threatened the interests of those who profited from the country's instability and dependence on foreign aid. But Lieutenant Amadou knew from his extensive training and battlefield experience that enemies never reveal themselves openly during daylight hours. They hide within crowds of innocent civilians, advancing their deadly agenda amidst the sounds of celebration and patriotic fervor. They strike when people's guards are down, when joy and hope mask the approach of violence and chaos. The convoy moved through the city streets with practiced precision, each driver maintaining exact distances and predetermined speeds. Local police had cleared the main routes, but curious onlookers continued to emerge from shops, offices, and homes, drawn by the sight of their presidential motorcade and the promise of witnessing history in the making. As they approached Place d'Ensemble Square, the heart of Ouagadougou's political and cultural life, the crowds grew exponentially larger and more enthusiastic. The square, named after a legendary warrior who had defended the region against colonial forces over a century ago, could accommodate up to 10,000 people, and today it seemed to be approaching that capacity. Thousands of people were waving the distinctive red, white, and green flags of Burkina Faso, holding hand-painted banners with messages of support and chanting, "Vive le Burkina Faso! Traore, notre héros! Long live Burkina Faso! Traore, our hero!" in voices that created a thunderous chorus echoing off the surrounding government buildings. The scene would warm the heart of any patriot and seem to validate every sacrifice made in service to the nation. Traditional drummers had positioned themselves near the main platform, their rhythmic beats adding an ancient spiritual dimension to the modern political gathering. Women dressed in vibrant traditional boubous danced spontaneously, their movements graceful and joyful. Children, perched on their fathers' shoulders, waved smaller flags, their innocent faces beaming with excitement at being part of something so important and historic. But Amadou's eyes weren't focused on this heartwarming spectacle of democratic participation. His training had taught him to see beyond the surface beauty of such events to the potential dangers lurking beneath. He remained intensely alert, his gaze constantly moving, carefully scanning every corner of the massive gathering crowd, every balcony or rooftop, every potential hiding place or avenue of attack. His radio crackled with regular updates from various security teams, crowd control reporting normal behavior patterns, sniper teams report clear sight lines, medical teams in position and ready. But Amadou had learned to trust his instincts even when technology and protocol suggested everything was normal. Suddenly, his trained gaze fixed on a group of 5 men standing in the northern corner of the square, near a cluster of old acacia trees that provided some shade from the brutal afternoon sun. These individuals were distinctly different from everyone else in their immediate vicinity. They weren't smiling or showing any signs of joy, weren't chanting patriotic slogans or waving flags, and kept leaning toward each other in hushed but obviously intense conversations that seemed completely at odds with the celebratory atmosphere surrounding them. Their body language spoke of tension and purpose rather than celebration. One of them kept checking his watch repeatedly. Another scanned the crowd with the methodical gaze of someone conducting surveillance rather than enjoying a public event. Most troubling of all, they seemed to be positioning themselves strategically, gradually moving closer to where the president's platform would be set up. Amadou's suspicions were immediately aroused, his pulse quickening as his extensive counter-terrorism training kicked in. He pressed the radio button with practiced efficiency and spoke in a low but urgently controlled tone. Alpha 3, suspicious activity in the northern corner near the acacia grove. 5 male subjects exhibiting unusual behavior patterns. Recommend immediate but discreet investigation. The response came quickly through his earpiece. Copy, Alpha Base. Plainclothes team is moving to investigate. Maintain observation. But even as he received confirmation that his concerns were being addressed, Amadou's uneasiness didn't diminish. If anything, it intensified. He could feel in his bones that this day was far from ordinary, that these moments, balanced on the knife's edge between peace and chaos, could change the course of history. Perhaps fate had chosen him to be here, at this place, at this exact moment, to stand as the final barrier between his country's future and those who would destroy it. The convoy completed its approach to the square, and Amadou could see the specially constructed platform where President Traore would address the nation. Security personnel were already in position, their eyes constantly moving, their hands never far from their weapons. In a few minutes, the president would step out of his protected vehicle and become vulnerable in ways that no amount of planning could completely eliminate. The presidential convoy had completed its carefully choreographed journey from the palace, with each vehicle maintaining its designated position like pieces in a precisely executed military formation. The sirens remained silent to avoid appearing overly militaristic, but their speed was steady and determined, as if each wheel understood that this journey could prove to be the most consequential in the nation's recent history. People continued to line both sides of the road despite the oppressive heat, waving flags with genuine enthusiasm and welcoming President Traore with the kind of authentic popular support that couldn't be manufactured or bought. Amadou sat in his designated Land Cruiser, positioned directly behind the president's specially armored black Mercedes-Benz, his senses heightened to an almost supernatural level of awareness. The atmosphere inside his vehicle was a study in controlled tension, calm on the surface, yet thrumming with barely contained vigilance. The driver, Sergeant Kinda, silently gripped the steering wheel with hands that had seen combat in 3 different conflict zones, while his partner, Corporal Zongo, monitored every whisper and coded message coming through the radio frequency with the intense concentration of a man whose life depended on missing nothing. Security codes continued to echo over the encrypted radio system with metronomic regularity. Eagle 1 en route. All units maintain positions. Perimeter teams report status every 60 seconds. This was the critical moment when every guard's nerves reached their absolute peak, when years of training and preparation would either prove sufficient or tragically inadequate. Amadou made subtle adjustments to his M16 assault rifle, ensuring the strap was positioned for maximum accessibility while remaining secure during rapid movement. A small bead of sweat had formed beneath his military-issued helmet, despite the air conditioning, evidence of the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. Brilliant sunlight gleamed off the car's specially treated bulletproof windows, creating momentary flashes that could have concealed a sniper's muzzle flash. But his eyes remained constantly focused outside, cataloging every face, every movement, every potential threat in the growing crowd. The moment the convoy entered the immediate perimeter of Place d'Ansem Square, the entire scene transformed dramatically from a city street to what resembled a massive outdoor festival. There was literally an ocean of humanity. Weathered elderly men leaning on walking sticks but standing proud, young mothers holding babies dressed in miniature versions of traditional clothing, teenagers with painted faces displaying the national colors, and children whose excited shouts could be heard even over the rumble of the convoy's engines. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy, resonating with thunderous chants of "Viva la Burkina Faso! Traore is notre hero! Long live Burkina Faso! Traore is our hero!" The waving flags had transformed the street into a flowing river of red, white, and green colors that rippled like water in the afternoon breeze. Traditional musicians had gathered in informal groups throughout the crowd, their kora harps and talking drums adding layers of ancient rhythm to the modern political demonstration. On any ordinary day, such a spectacular scene of popular democracy would fill any security officer's heart with profound pride in his country and its people. The sight of thousands of citizens voluntarily gathering to support their democratically elected leader represented everything that made their nation worth defending. But today, for Lieutenant Amadou, this overwhelming display of joy and patriotism came with an undercurrent of mortal danger that made every celebratory sound potentially masking the approach of violence. His eyes never left the crowd for even a moment, not even to acknowledge the enthusiastic waves directed at the convoy. He was methodically noting every face that seemed out of place, every movement that didn't match the celebratory rhythm of the event, every gesture that might indicate hostile intent rather than patriotic enthusiasm. Throughout the vast crowd, the vast majority of people waved enthusiastically upon catching sight of the president's distinctive vehicle. their faces lighting up with genuine affection for a leader they believed was working to improve their lives. Others immediately pulled out mobile phones to record videos they would treasure for years, creating a digital archive of this historic moment. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders for better views, their laughter adding an innocent counterpoint to the adult voices raised in political support. But then his attention was drawn like a magnet to the same 5 men he had noticed earlier, still standing in the northern corner of the crowd near the ancient acacia trees. They remained distinctly different from everyone else in their vicinity, islands of tension in an ocean of celebration. They weren't participating in any of the collective expressions of joy, weren't taking photographs or videos, and most significantly, their eyes remained constantly fixed on the president's vehicle with an intensity that spoke of calculation rather than admiration. Their positioning had subtly shifted during the convoy's approach, Amadou noted, with growing alarm. They had moved closer to the route the president would take when exiting his vehicle, and their formation seemed almost tactical in nature. One of them appeared to have something substantial concealed inside his loose-fitting jacket, something that created an unnatural bulge near his right side, a bulge that resembled the distinctive shape of either a weapon or an explosive device. An electric shock of recognition ran through Amadou's entire body as the pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. He immediately pressed the radio button, his voice filled with controlled urgency that every member of the security team would recognize as a legitimate threat assessment. Alpha 3, priority alert. Same 5 individuals in northern corner have repositioned closer to the primary route. One subject appears to be carrying a concealed object consistent with weapon profile. This is not a drill. Request immediate tactical response. After what seemed like an eternity but was actually only a few seconds of radio silence, the response finally came through his earpiece. Copy, Alpha Base. Tactical team is moving to intercept. Maintain observation and prepare for potential threat escalation. But Amadou's extensive combat experience and counterterrorism training sent every alarm bell in his consciousness ringing simultaneously. It would take precious time for the tactical team to navigate through the dense crowd and reach those men. In situations involving potential assassination attempts, a few seconds often meant the difference between preventing a tragedy and responding to a catastrophe. Every fiber of his being was now focused on those 5 figures, and his heart had begun beating with the rhythm of impending combat. The president's convoy came to its predetermined stop at the designated security zone. The specially modified black Mercedes heavy door locks disengaged with a series of mechanical clicks that seemed unnaturally loud despite the crowd noise. President Traore emerged with his characteristic confident smile, immediately raising his hand in acknowledgement of the tremendous welcome he was receiving from his people. The crowd's response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Thousands of voices rose together in a cheer that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. People began pressing forward with renewed enthusiasm, waving flags more vigorously and calling out personal messages of support and gratitude. It was a moment of pure democratic connection between a leader and his people, and exactly the kind of moment that assassins sought to exploit. Security guards immediately formed their rehearsed protective formation around the president, creating multiple layers of human shields while maintaining enough space for him to interact naturally with the crowd. Their movements were choreographed through countless hours of practice, but Amadou knew that no amount of preparation could account for every possible variable in a situation this dynamic and unpredictable. Amadou was walking in his assigned position, step by measured step, alongside the president on the right side of the formation, his weapon ready but not overtly displayed in a way that might alarm the civilian population. His eyes remained locked on the northern corner where those 5 suspicious men continued to maintain their unnatural stillness in the midst of the celebration surrounding them. Amidst the thunderous cheers of the crowd, the hypnotic waving of thousands of flags, and the brilliant glare of the afternoon sun reflecting off vehicles and windows, time seemed to slow down for Amadou with the strange clarity that often comes to soldiers in moments of extreme danger. Every movement in his field of vision became crystalline clear, every gesture and facial expression etched into his memory with photographic precision, every breath of air seeming to carry the weight of destiny. He noticed one of the 5 men slowly beginning to make his way through the tightly packed crowd toward the president's position. Unlike the enthusiastic citizens around him, who pushed forward with joy and excitement, this individual moved with deliberate purpose, his path calculated and direct. His right hand remained firmly gripping something concealed inside his jacket, and his eyes never wavered from their target, President Traore. The man's face was a mask of cold determination, devoid of the emotions that animated everyone around him. There was no curiosity, no excitement, no patriotic fervor, only the focused intensity of someone committed to completing a mission regardless of the consequences. His movement pattern was all wrong for a celebrating citizen. It was the methodical approach of a predator stalking prey. Amadou's extensive combat experience and counterterrorism training sent every alarm bell in his consciousness ringing simultaneously. This is the threat. This is the moment. This is what every instinct had been warning him about since the morning briefing. He gave one final urgent warning over the radio, his voice cutting through the static with absolute authority. Target is moving, approaching the president from the northern corner. Male subject, approximately 30 years old, dark jacket, moving with hostile intent. This is happening now. But as he spoke those words, he realized that the tactical response team was still too far away, still fighting their way through the dense crowd of celebrating citizens who had no idea they were witnessing the opening moments of an assassination attempt. Radio communication, no matter how sophisticated, required time for processing and response that they simply didn't have. The threatening individual had already emerged from the densest part of the crowd and was rapidly closing the distance to President Traore's position. Security protocols demanded that Amadou maintain his assigned position and trust in the system, but his warrior instinct screamed that the system was about to fail catastrophically. The commotion at Place d'Ensemble Square had reached its emotional peak. Flags created a sea of national colors that rippled like ocean waves. Patriotic chants echoed off the buildings with enough force to be heard kilometers away. And President Traore was actively engaging with his people, shaking hands with citizens who had waited hours in the scorching heat for this moment of connection with their leader. For the thousands of ordinary citizens packed into the square, this scene represented the very best of democratic participation, a leader accessible to his people, celebrating national unity and progress together. But for Lieutenant Amadou, this same scene had become a battlefield where the enemy was about to strike at the heart of their democracy, and he was potentially the last line of defense. His training had prepared him for exactly this scenario, but no amount of preparation could completely eliminate the surge of adrenaline and the weight of responsibility he felt as he watched the threat approaching. The lives of not just the president, but potentially dozens of innocent civilians now depended on his next actions. The suspicious man continued his deliberate advance through the crowd, and Amadou could now see him clearly enough to make out additional details that confirmed his worst fears. The individual was sweating profusely despite the crowd's shade, but it wasn't the honest sweat of patriotic excitement. It was the cold perspiration of nervous tension and deadly purpose. Suddenly, in a movement that seemed to occur in slow motion, the man reached into his jacket and began to withdraw a metallic object. A ray of brilliant sunlight struck its surface, creating a blinding flash that seemed to burn itself into Amadou's retinas. Grenade. The realization hit him with the force of physical impact. He immediately understood that if even a single second was wasted in hesitation or protocol, not only would President Traore be killed, but the explosion would tear through the densely packed crowd, murdering dozens of innocent men, women, and children who had come here only to celebrate their country and their hopes for the future. Time seemed to compress into a single point of absolute clarity. The crowd's noise became muffled in Amadou's ears as his entire being focused on the unfolding crisis. Only his own heartbeat was audible, fast, heavy, and seemingly loud enough to drown out the thousands of voices surrounding him. He took the deepest breath of his life and shouted with every ounce of strength in his body, "Mr. President, get down! Grenade!" President Traore, trained by years of surviving previous attempts on his life, immediately responded to the urgency in Amadou's voice. His security detail sprang into action with practiced efficiency, beginning to form a protective barrier around their leader. But even as the guards moved, the attacker took advantage of the momentary confusion to complete his deadly task. He pulled the grenade's pin with a metallic click that somehow seemed to cut through all the surrounding noise. Amadou knew with mathematical certainty that they had only 3 to 4 seconds before the explosive device would detonate with enough force to kill everyone within a 10-meter radius and severely wound anyone within 20 meters. The physics of the situation allowed for no negotiation, no alternative solutions, no time for backup plans. Without conscious thought, operating on pure instinct and the courage that had been forged through years of training and service, he launched himself through the crowd at lightning speed. The weight of his equipment, the restrictive nature of his uniform, and the oppressive heat that had been sapping everyone's energy throughout the day, none of these factors mattered anymore. His body moved with the fluid precision of a man whose entire life had been preparing him for this exact moment. With both hands moving faster than conscious thought, Amadou grabbed the attacker's wrist in a grip strengthened by years of military training and combat experience. He gave it a powerful twisting jerk that utilized leverage and technique rather than brute force alone, successfully wrenching the armed grenade from the would-be assassin's grasp before the man could realize what was happening. The moment the explosive device was in his possession, Amadou faced a split-second decision that would define not only his own legacy, but potentially the future of his entire nation. He could attempt to find cover for himself, he could try to shield the president directly, or he could make the ultimate sacrifice that every soldier understands but prays never to face. Without any hesitation, driven by a love of country and fellow citizens that transcended personal survival, he threw the grenade with all his considerable strength toward a relatively deserted corner of the square, away from the densest concentrations of celebrating civilians. His aim was true, guided by the same divine providence that seemed to have placed him in position to intercept this attack in the first place. But the battle was far from over. The moment the grenade left his hands, sailing through the air in a deadly arc toward the least populated section of the square, the attacker revealed the true depth of his commitment to completing his murderous mission. With the swift, practiced movement of a professional killer, he pulled a black automatic pistol from his waistband, his eyes burning with the fanatic intensity of a man prepared to die for his cause. The weapon was a modern 9mm automatic, likely smuggled across international borders as part of the broader conspiracy that intelligence reports had warned about. In the hands of a trained assassin, it was capable of firing 15 rounds in rapid succession with deadly accuracy at close range. His target was crystal clear and never wavered. President Ibrahim Traore, the democratically elected leader whose progressive policies and anti-corruption campaigns had made him enemies among those who profited from Burkina Faso's previous instability and dependence on foreign exploitation. But Amadou didn't give the assassin even the time to properly aim his weapon. In a movement that embodied every principle of courage and self-sacrifice that he had learned from his military training and his deep love for his country, he positioned his own body directly between the president and the attacker, transforming himself into a human shield with full knowledge of the consequences. His last coherent thought before the shooting began was not of his own survival, but of his mother selling vegetables in the market, of the children he taught at community events about patriotism and service, and of the better future that President Traore's leadership could bring to all the people of Burkina Faso. The next moment stretched into eternity. The assassin's fingers squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. Bang, bang, bang. The reports echoed across the square like thunder, momentarily drowning out even the massive crowd's noise and creating a moment of confusion that seemed to freeze everyone in place. 3 bullets struck Lieutenant Amadou Savadogu directly, 2 in his back, penetrating between his shoulder blades and tearing through muscle and tissue, and 1 in his right shoulder, shattering bone and causing massive trauma. Each impact felt like being struck by a sledgehammer wielded by an invisible giant, driving him forward and down, but not breaking his determination to protect his president and his people. Simultaneously, the grenade he had thrown toward the deserted corner exploded with a deafening blast that shook windows throughout the square and sent a column of smoke and dust high into the afternoon sky. The explosion was powerful enough to crater the concrete pavement and send shrapnel flying in all directions, but thanks to Amadou's quick thinking and accurate throw, it killed no one and seriously injured no civilians. Clouds of gray smoke and choking dust immediately covered the entire square, transforming the scene from a patriotic celebration into what resembled a war zone. People began screaming in terror and confusion, not understanding what was happening or where the danger was coming from. Children clung to their mothers, elderly citizens fell to the ground seeking cover, and guards throughout the area began shouting orders and trying to restore some semblance of control to the chaos. Several members of the presidential security detail took immediate advantage of the confusion to overwhelm the now exposed attacker. They tackled him to the ground with professional efficiency, confiscated his weapons, and secured him with restraints that would prevent any further attempts at violence. The expression on his face remained defiant and filled with hatred, but the gleam of impending victory had been replaced by the bitter disappointment of failure. Amadou lay motionless on the blood-stained pavement, his military uniform torn and saturated with his own blood. His breathing had become labored and shallow, each inhalation requiring tremendous effort as his punctured lungs struggled to function. Waves of pain coursed through his body like electric shocks, but his eyes remained focused and alert, searching through the smoke and confusion for one crucial sight. Through the hazy, dust-filled scene, he could see President Traore standing upright and apparently unharmed, surrounded by his protective detail and being rapidly moved toward the safety of his armored vehicle. The president was looking back toward Amadou with an expression that combined gratitude, admiration, and profound sorrow. Despite the agony that threatened to overwhelm his consciousness, a satisfied smile spread across Amadou's face. He had completed his mission. He had preserved not just one man's life, but the stability and democratic future of his beloved country. President Traore's voice, strong and clear despite the surrounding chaos, rang out across the square. "Get medical attention for Lieutenant Savadogo immediately. This brave man has saved not just my life, but the soul of our nation." With his remaining strength, only a soft but determined sentence escaped Amadou's lips, words that would be remembered and quoted for generations to come. "Mission accomplished. The president is safe. Long live Burkina Faso." Then the overwhelming combination of blood loss, physical trauma, and emotional exhaustion finally claimed his consciousness. The sounds of the crowd became distant and muffled, like voices heard from underwater. The bright afternoon sunlight gradually faded to gray, then to black, as Lieutenant Amadou Savadogo drifted into unconsciousness, not knowing whether he would ever wake again, but certain that he had fulfilled his duty to his country and his people in the most complete way possible. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness completely was the sound of sirens approaching, ambulances, and additional security forces responding to the crisis. And somewhere in that fading cacophony of sound, he thought he heard his mother's voice, calling his name with the same love and pride that had sustained him throughout his life.